Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace be upon you and welcome. Today, I want to walk you through a really short but incredibly deep passage from the Quran's 6th chapter, Surah Al-An'am. These few verses, they lay out this incredible picture of our existence using one of the most powerful metaphors you can imagine: light versus darkness, life versus death. So let's explore these two paths together. So right at the core of this whole passage is this really fundamental choice between two states of being. On one hand, you've got someone who is spiritually alive, walking forward in a guiding light, and on the other, you have someone who's spiritually dead, just lost in a darkness they can never seem to get out of. And this isn't just nice poetry. The Quran is describing two totally different ways of moving through life. The whole thing kicks off with this really powerful question, and its power is in how obvious the answer is, right? Can you really truly compare someone who is given life and light to someone who's just stuck in the dark? The text throws this challenge out there, and the verses that come next are really just a deep dive into the answer.
All right, so let's start by digging into these key metaphors. What does the Quran actually mean when it talks about being spiritually dead or alive? What is this light it's talking about, and what are these darknesses? Let's take a closer look.
So what the Quran's doing here is really powerful. It's using this idea of life and death, but for the soul. A state of disbelief, being cut off from your Creator, is described as a kind of spiritual death. And just like a breath of air can bring a body back to life, the text is arguing that divine guidance, revelation, is what breathes life back into the soul, giving it both that life and the light it needs to see its way forward.
Okay, so once you have that internal state, what happens on the outside? How does it show up in someone's behavior? Well, the text points to one major symptom for those who choose darkness: a really destructive kind of pride, of arrogance. And the Quran presents this as something that just happens, again and again throughout history. Verse 123 points out that in basically every society, you have these powerful figures who show up and mock the truth, who scheme against it. They think they're being so clever, plotting in the shadows. But the verse makes this chilling point: the only people they're really plotting against are themselves. They just can't see it yet.
I mean, just listen to the sheer ego in that demand. Their problem isn't a sincere search for the truth. It's just jealousy. It's all about status. They're basically saying, hey, why wasn't I chosen? I'm not going to believe in a message that doesn't put me and my importance at the very center. It's an objection that comes completely from a place of pride.
And then comes the divine response, and it's so calm, so absolute, and it just puts all that human ego right in its place. The choice of who gets to carry the message, well, that isn't based on our human ideas of wealth or power. It belongs to a divine wisdom that sees things we could never see. It's this beautiful contrast, right? Tiny, finite human pride versus this vast, infinite divine knowledge.
All right, so we've seen how that darkness plays out on the outside with arrogance, but let's go back inside for a minute. What does it actually feel like to be on the path of light versus the path of darkness? The Quran describes two experiences that are polar opposites.
This is, for me, one of the most stunning images in the entire Quran. To describe that inner anxiety of someone who rejects faith, it uses this image of a chest becoming tight and constricted, almost as if they were physically climbing higher and higher into the sky, where the air gets thin and you can't breathe. It's such a visceral, physical metaphor for a spiritual state of suffocation. So the contrast couldn't be more clear, right? For the person who accepts guidance, there's this feeling of an expanded chest, a sense of openness, of peace, of clarity. But for the one who turns away, there's that constriction, that anxiety, that feeling of spiritual breathlessness. The condition of the soul is literally felt in the heart. Okay, so the passage then kind of zooms out, because it's not just about us as individuals, in our own little bubble. It's also about who we choose to be with, who we align ourselves with, our friends, our allies. They play a huge role in shaping our path, and ultimately, where we end up.
First up, we get the name for the destination for those on that path of light. It's called Dar al-Salam, the home of peace, and it's described as this place of perfect safety and rest, where God himself is their protector, their friend. I mean, that sets the stakes incredibly high.
But then you have the other side, the alliances of those in darkness. The Quran gets specific here, describing this unholy alliance between misguided people and the jinn, these unseen beings. And on the day of judgment, they're all brought together to face what they did. And what they admit is so telling. They say, "Our Lord, some of us made use of others." It was a corrupt bargain, plain and simple. The jinn offered misguidance, and the humans followed along for some kind of worldly gain.
And this next verse basically lays out the spiritual law behind all of this. It's a simple but really powerful idea. Wrongdoers are drawn to each other. They become allies, they reinforce each other's bad habits. Like attracts like. And their shared actions in this life, well, they lead to a shared fate in the next one.
So that brings us to the end of the line, the final stop for both of these paths. We've seen how they start, the mindset they create, what they feel like inside, and the company they attract. Now, let's just summarize where each of these very different journeys ultimately leads.
So as we've walked through this, we've seen how this passage presents this profound choice. It all starts with that core idea of life versus death, of being alive in the light of God's guidance or being lost and dead in the darkness of disbelief. And we saw how this choice isn't just some abstract idea. It shows up as a self-destructive arrogance in those who reject the truth. This leads to that inner feeling of spiritual suffocation. But on the flip side, guidance brings a deep internal peace. And these choices, they have real consequences. They create alliances that decide who will be within the next life, leading to one of two final destinations, ruin or the home of peace.
And so we end right back where we began, with that fundamental question. These verses lay out the choice with such incredible clarity. They don't just show us the paths, but what it feels like to walk them and where they end up. The question it leaves us with is a big one. Light or darkness? Which of these two paths will ultimately define a life? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.